Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the complex, incredibly high-stakes world of enterprise risk management and the COSO framework. Whether you're managing a small regional team or overseeing a massive global enterprise, understanding how to effectively structure, identify, and actually mitigate risk, well, that's exactly what separates the companies that thrive from the ones that completely collapse. So, let's get right into the weeds. So, how exactly do businesses survive the unpredictable? Navigating uncertainty isn't just about luck, and it certainly isn't about staring into a crystal ball. It really requires a highly structured, deliberate approach to the unknown. Imagine a sudden, catastrophic collapse of your primary overseas supply chain, or maybe a rapid, unprecedented shift in global interest rates. The organizations that survive those kinds of massive shocks, they've already modeled those exact possibilities. Let's start with the core definition. Risk management is a systematic process. It is absolutely not some one-time brainstorm you do at an annual retreat. It's a rigorous, ongoing discipline. Risk itself is fundamentally a function of three things: the severity of the consequences, the probability of it occurring, and its ultimate effect on your strategic goals. Think about it. If you're launching a groundbreaking tech product, a competitor beating you to market is a huge risk. You have to calculate, mathematically, how likely is that to happen, and financially, how catastrophic would that consequence be? That intersection right there is your risk severity. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The risk management cycle, 2. Roles in managing risk, 3. An intro to COSO ERM, 4. Strategy, appetite, and tolerance, 5. The 5 ERM components, and finally, 6. Strategies for risk response. Let's jump in. Section 1. The risk management cycle, from context to continuous monitoring. You have to follow these 5 steps sequentially. You literally cannot accurately assess a risk you haven't identified yet, right? Imagine a retail company expanding down into South America. Step 1 is establishing the context. What are the new local labor laws or the foreign exchange rates? Step 2 is risk identification at all levels of the entity, often using something like a SWOT analysis. The CEO might be up at night worrying about currency devaluation, but the local IT manager, they're identifying the risk of regional internet outages. Step 3 assesses and prioritizes those risks based on severity. Step 4 dictates the response, like, say, investing in backup servers. And finally, Step 5 is continuous monitoring, where an objective internal audit team verifies if those backup servers are actually doing their job and mitigating downtime. Now, when you hit Step 3, risk assessment, you've got a choice to make on how to evaluate the threat. Qualitative methods, like standardized questionnaires and management interviews, are highly efficient. They're cost-effective for everyday operational risks where you rely on human expertise to categorize threats simply as high, medium, or low. But for massive, bet-the-company financial decisions, you need quantitative methods. These offer extreme precision using hard data. A bank assessing mortgage defaults isn't going to just send out a survey. They're going to use Monte Carlo simulations, running thousands of complex algorithmic scenarios to calculate the exact probable financial loss down to the dollar. Moving to Section 2, roles in managing risk. Basically, who is actually accountable? Accountability here is beautifully mapped out by the Institute of Internal Auditors' 3 lines model. Management fully owns the first and second lines. The first line consists of your frontline operators, for example, the loan officers at a bank, who directly interface with clients and have to manage those immediate transactional risks. The second line contains specialists providing critical support and monitoring. Think of your bank's dedicated compliance department, ensuring those loan officers are actually following federal regulations. And then the third line is entirely independent. Internal audit. They don't report to management at all. They provide objective assurance directly to the governing body, usually the board of directors, who sit at the very top ensuring the whole system aligns with shareholder interests. Section 3. Intro to COSO ERM, Integrating Strategy. Read this definition carefully, because the massive takeaway here is that ERM is definitely not just some compliance checklist executed by a back-office team. Not at all. It is a holistic culture. It represents your core capabilities, seamlessly integrating with how executives actually set the business strategy. When an organization truly adopts ERM, risk is considered while setting goals, not as an afterthought. This drastically improves decision-making, it optimizes how you deploy resources, and it creates true enterprise-wide resilience. It allows the company to not just survive a crisis, but to actively create and preserve value. It is so crucial to understand the difference between the micro and macro view of risk. A risk profile is your micro view. It's a composite view focused entirely on a specific operating unit, product, or geography. Like, a profile asks, what are the specific supply chain bottlenecks just for our new European division? A portfolio view, on the other hand, demands full integration. It is the macro-level composite of all risks affecting the entire entity's overall strategy. Let's put it this way. If the risk profile is looking really closely at a single chess piece, the portfolio view is the board of directors looking at the entire chessboard, understanding exactly how moving a piece in Europe is going to impact liquidity over in Asia. Section 4, Strategy and Appetite. Defining the boundaries of acceptable risk. Notice how these three vital definitions actually nest right within each other. The largest, outermost boundary is capacity. This is the absolute maximum amount of risk the organization can financially absorb without going completely bankrupt. Inside that is tolerance, which represents the acceptable variation in performance, basically the operational wiggle room you have around specific objectives. And finally, the tightest metric is appetite. This is the target amount of risk the organization is actively willing to accept in pursuit of value. Listen, you never want your appetite to exceed your capacity. If your absolute total capacity for financial loss is $1 million, your appetite has to be set strictly below that, say at $200,000, just to ensure the organization survives a worst-case scenario. Let's use a very physical scenario to separate three incredibly important risk terms. Inherent risk is the raw danger absent of any management actions or controls. So if you decide to build an oil pipeline in a freezing, sub-zero climate, the inherent risk of those pipes bursting is exceptionally high. Actual residual risk is the threat level that remains after management applies controls, like wrapping the pipes in heavy-duty insulation and installing automated heating systems. The risk drops significantly, but it is rarely zero. And critically, the possibility that your mitigation tools, like the heating systems themselves, might break down or lose power, that's a separate concept entirely, known as control risk. All right, Section 5, the 5 ERM components. This is the core structure of COSO ERM. These 5 interrelated components form the literal DNA of enterprise risk management. It all starts with governance and culture, which establishes the ethical tone at the top. Think of a CEO stating loudly and clearly that customer data privacy is a non-negotiable core value. Next is strategy and objective setting, where the business goals and risk appetite are defined, like deciding to launch a brand new mobile banking app. Then comes performance, where the actual risks of that app, like a potential data breach, are identified, assessed, and prioritized. Review and revision ensures continuous improvement, adapting your controls as the hackers inevitably get smarter. Finally, information, communication, and reporting leverages technology to ensure that breach data is communicated instantly from the IT basement straight up to the boardroom. Deep within that performance component, management has to strictly assess the severity of the risks they've identified. This requires weighing the impact, which is the actual financial or reputational damage of the event, against the likelihood, the probability it will actually occur. Crucially, the time horizon you evaluate absolutely must perfectly match the related business objective. If your strategic goal is mapped over a 2-year period, you have to assess the risk over that exact same 2-year timeline. Organizations often utilize risk modeling here, plotting these metrics on a heat map. Remote, minor risks sit down in the bottom corner and receive minimal funding, while highly likely critical risks get mapped to the top right and immediately trigger the deployment of major capital and resources. Which brings us to Section 6, Strategies for Risk Response, 5 ways to manage the inevitable. So once a risk is prioritized, management basically has 5 precise plays in the playbook. If a risk is low enough to fall comfortably within your appetite, you choose acceptance. You're essentially self-insuring and doing nothing out of the ordinary. If a risk is simply too catastrophic to mitigate, like geopolitical instability threatening a physical asset, your response is avoidance. You completely exit the market or sell off the asset. Alternatively, you can choose pursuit, actively accepting greater risk because the potential for explosive market growth totally outweighs the danger. You could choose reduction, mitigating the risk by, for example, investing millions in robust firewalls to drastically reduce the likelihood of a cyber attack. Finally, you can share the risk. This means transferring the financial burden to a third party by purchasing corporate insurance policies or maybe forming strategic joint ventures. I want to leave you with a pretty provocative thought to apply directly to your own corporate environment. Does your organization's perceived risk appetite actually align with its true risk capacity? It's a high-stakes question. Too often, executive teams genuinely believe they're playing it safe, only to discover during a major crisis that their actual capacity to survive a financial loss was much, much smaller than they blindly assumed. I highly challenge you to look at your operations through this incredibly structured lens. Understanding these exact cycles, models, and frameworks is the absolute key to mastering uncertainty. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.